Our guest, Ann Coulter, has written High Crimes and Misdemeanors, the Case Against Bill Clinton. The book has been acclaimed by Judge Robert Bork as, quote, sprightly in style, a welcome relief from the lugubrious Teutonic language in which Clinton defenders described the unthinkable disaster of impeachment. If Clinton resigns, we should acknowledge that if he does, it will move us a lot closer towards parliamentary government.
I totally disagree with that. I think that would be true if impeachment
he
were
meant
being
to be wrong when he said that.
Could be true if we were discussing impeachment because President Clinton raised our taxes too much, or because he didn't intervene someplace where he should have, or the bombings in Afghanistan, and that's why policy disputes are not resolved by impeachment. Character is resolved by impeachment. If anything, I think we're moving closer to supremacy of the Congress just by keeping him in office. He's so weakened and shamed the office of the presidency.
Because he committed adultery?
He's done so much more.
Well, I asked you the first question.
No, not. I think that could be a high crime and misdemeanor. Certainly, the reprehensible acts with Monica, which is, I think, quite a bit more than adultery. There are degrees of murder, there are degrees of adultery, and not knowing her name for the first two sexual encounters. She's an intern, she's 21 years old, their first substantive discussion after their sixth encounter. Yes, that is reprehensible enough that it is clearly a high crime and misdemeanor, as is drunkenness. But adultery by itself, I don't know. I suppose you could have debates about that. He's done so much more than just the reprehensible conduct with Monica, but this idea that it has to be some sort of grand abuse of power, it was a bit more in Great Britain because it was used for policy disputes. It was part of Parliament making a run at the king whose veto they couldn't override. But in this country, as impeachment scholar Raoul Berger has said, impeachment was once initiated to topple giants. It's fallen in this country to impeaching squalid little judges for sordid misconduct. And that
I asked you, is adultery in and of itself sufficient to oust a president? You were ambiguous in your reply. I think the American people probably would be pretty unambiguous in suggesting that would be insufficient cause. The president simply has gone a lot of steps further than anybody else has gone, and it is Philistine to refuse to allow your imagination to develop in the direction of liberal understanding of sexual activity to call him short on this point.
There is a meaning to high crimes and misdemeanors, as there is a meaning to cruel and unusual punishment. And standards may change. I think tomorrow, if Louisiana passed a law providing for vivisection for shoplifters, I think everyone would agree that that is clearly cruel and unusual punishment. High crimes and misdemeanors are the same way. And what the amazing thing is about this president is actually watching standards crumble before your eyes just over the course of a couple of years. Each step he takes, people say, okay, fine, that's okay now. Well, we had a big hearing. The whole country was focused on what Clarence Thomas may have said to a woman who wasn't an intern. She was a lawyer. She was slightly his subordinate. She certainly could have gone anyplace else. He didn't drop his pants and say, kiss it. He wasn't demanding to be serviced with oral sex repeatedly. It was only what he said to her. That was a few years ago. So to have someone say, well, no, these are new standards now, much like cruel and unusual punishment, suddenly we think vivisection is okay for shoplifting. I think that isn't the case. If what
Hold
the
it for
president...
1 minute. Nobody, as I recall, suggested that Thomas be impeached. It was a question of whether he should be approved for a promotion. Now, I don't think anybody suggests that if Clinton was up for promotion, in this atmosphere they would promote him.
Well, they aren't as different as...
Promotion and impeachment?
It's not so much promotion. It was a question of whether he was fit for the office. And that is what impeachment is about. And in fact, for the president...
My memory is moderately reliable on this. I don't think anybody said Clarence Thomas should not only not go to the Supreme Court, but we want to knock him out of the Court of Appeals where he sat.
Yes, but there are different standards for what office it is you're fit for. Just as you would expect a man to be more fit for the Supreme Court rather than an appellate court, the president is especially supposed to be fit.
My question is, did they think that the charge that you just finished reciting was sufficient to pull him out, i.e. to impeach him from his existing role? The answer is no. They didn't, did they?
No, but what I'm saying
Senator Packwood,
is...
yes, they did. in Senator Packwood, they said, yes, we can't tolerate him as a senator.
Right, but a fitness for the founders, for example, expected congressmen to be rogues. All three authors of the Federalist Papers described what sort of man would be elevated to the office of the presidency. It was always supposed to be a virtuous man, and they used that word, all three of them, although they write about different aspects of the Constitution. So it would be a different standard for impeaching a president for a certain sort of misconduct, or a congressman. Congressmen were sort of expected to be rogues, even governors. Hamilton writes that it would take a different kind of man to be elevated to the presidency than to the highest honors of a single state. I still think the Thomas example is relevant for what standards are. I mean, if the president of Stanford University did what Clinton did to Monica, to Chelsea, people would be enraged, there would be lawsuits. Maybe Clinton is defining deviancy down so quickly that now suddenly his behavior toward Monica, treating her basically like a dog and not a fellow human being, maybe that is acceptable behavior for the man who was supposed to be the most virtuous in this country. I don't think so, and I hope that's not the case.
Well, let me intrude the following. To the extent that Madison had most virtuous in mind for the president, I think that paradigmatic understanding of the presidency disappeared very early in American history. The quarrels that took place between Adams, Jefferson, and Burr and Jackson were not quarrels that were understood by spectators as quarrels between the most virtuous and the second most virtuous man. They were simply by different political leaders. So I think it's distracting in the current conversation to say that somebody should be ousted from the White House because he isn't as virtuous as we would hope he would be.
Obstructing justice and lying to the American people unless it falls in the president's duties as commander-in-chief. I mean, the idea that we no longer expect presidents to be virtuous, they may not be elected because they actually have the most virtue. But that is the idea of impeachment, to keep them, not only would virtuous men be elevated to the office, perhaps not the most virtuous man, but a virtuous man, but the office would elevate the man. And I have to say, I think to a surprising extent that has been true in American history. Even that rogue President Johnson actually did behave a little bit differently when he assumed the Oval Office. And I might add, one of them, only 25 years ago, one of the most astonishing things to come out during when the tapes came out was that there was cursing going on in the Oval Office.
Let's focus for a moment on the fear a lot of people have of what impeachment means. If you throw him out of office, you got a change in government. You got a lot of judges that have to be reappointed, ambassadors that have to be appointed, and that's disruptive. The other sense, it is constitutionally disruptive, not because the transition can't be made, in fact it's made every 4 years. It means that the kind of security felt by the chief executive is diminished, and there would be kind of a nervousness in exercising her responsibility in the future. I take it on the first point at least, you don't really think it would be all that disruptive, right?
Not as disruptive as the president staying in that office after what he's done.
Could you explain why you say that?
For so many reasons, but part of it is his behavior. I mean, we basically are just saying the country doesn't give a damn about decency or care about honor, and as long as you have a pack of good lawyers and spinners to go out, you can lie and cheat and steal. I think it's disruptive to the entire society, to capitalism, and to a democracy. We're just saying our leaders lie to us, and they lie to us repeatedly, and we don't care because our mutual funds are doing well. I mean, that literally is.
Let's say, okay, we'll censor him.
Well, that's nothing. I mean, that is doing nothing. They may as well declare National Kumquat Day. It has absolutely no constitutional meaning. I mean, that's what the impeachment clause is for. If the Congress wants to censure the president, what it does is impeaches him and removes him.
Well, but there never has been a censure of a president. There's been an impeachment, as we both know. But wouldn't that be a singular rebuke to the president?
No, I think it would be precisely on the order of this string of Democrats taking to the Senate floor, saying that the president was immoral, reprehensible. They're appalled, they're betrayed, they feel misled, and now I've got to get back to my office. I mean, there has to be some consequence to what they're saying about the president. This is the president of the United States. It is quite different to say, we're indicting you and sending you to jail, than to say, you're not the guy who should have his finger on the nuclear button. That is what the statement is. He cannot look the American people in the eye and send their boys into war and have them believe we really need to do this, and not have people think it's some sort of political stunt. His word is worthless now, and he's the commander-in-chief. He may need to send boys into war.
Why would you say that the censure of the president would have zero consequences? Because it can't have consequences? He's not running for re-election after all.
Right. I mean, we already know he's a pervert, he's a creep, he's a liar, he obstructs justice. He appears to actually be a criminal. And this is going to bring us him down in our esteem, that Congress finally gets around to saying, and we censure you. I mean, half the editorials in America have censored him. If anything, it just weakens us even more in the eyes of the world, and I think besmirches the office even more. But it has no actual consequence beyond Congress saying, we censure you, whatever. I mean, it's not like they take away Air Force One or something. There's no punishment attached to it. There's no limitation in his authorities. There can't be. He's the sole repository of the vast and enormous powers of the executive branch.
You speak as though there was no possibility of a stigma having any consequence. Societies tend to look for rituals in which there is a means of formalizing that disapproval. And the censure is one way to do that.
Well, there's another way that's in the Constitution.
Impeachment.
Yes.
Okay, then let me ask you this. Why is there, since you consider it so irrational, such a widespread resistance to impeachment?
I've heard a lot of mouthpieces for the American people, and frankly, I don't believe them. I don't believe the polls. I believe one poll, the only poll that counts, and that's the Election Day poll. And the Democrats running for election this time around appear not to be relying on those polls either. Otherwise, they wouldn't be taking to the floor of the House and the Senate constantly denouncing the president. They don't seem to be very buoyed by the alleged polls of the American people. And I suppose we'll see in November. And if the Republicans merely hold the House, pick up a few seats, I think that will be quite an accomplishment in itself. I mean, having taken Congress for the first time in 40 years, that means you have people in 60 districts who had not voted for a Republican in 40 years, did so for the first time 4 years ago. Merely to hold on to that majority is going to be, I think, quite striking, and I suspect it's going to be more than Republicans holding on to it this November, and so do the Democrats.
You're talking much more mincingly now than you were 30 seconds ago. 30 seconds ago, you're talking about national outrage. Now you're talking about 3 or 4 votes. In fact, in off-year elections, the executive tends to lose. So it shouldn't have been all that surprising if the Democrats reduced their standing from whatever it is, 46% to 45%. But you say one thing you do believe is the polls.
No, I don't believe the polls. That's what I'm saying.
One thing you said, is the elections. One thing you do believe is the elections. But short of an absolute repudiation of the Democrats who are prepared to go with impeachment, what are the American people saying to you then? Suppose you were here 2 months from now, and the elections showed that it stayed roughly the same, or a few more Republicans came in, or a few more Democrats. In other words, that it hadn't become the cause militant of the voters. You would conclude what from that? My
specialty really isn't in reading the American people, it's in reading the Constitution.
Your conclusions are very dark.
Yes, you really can't have civilization if people just casually tell lies. Everyone knows it, and you can't rely on someone's word. You can't have capitalism if you can't rely on the merchant's word.
Thank you very much.